As I said before we went to commercial break, this is one of those stories where when you read the headline, you have to look at it twice because sadly here in this case, we talk about cases of sexual misconduct. This is in the news from time to time, far too often. But when it comes to this headline, sexual misconduct by doctors, and then find out it's underreported, then yes, we want to find out more. Dr. Shannon Ruzycki is a general internist and assistant professor at the University of Calgary and the co-author of a study detailing some of the problems, some of the issues here, and is on the line. Dr. Ruzycki, thanks for the time this afternoon. Look,
thank you for having me.
Yeah, let me begin. First of all, the numbers to me are, they're stunning. You've identified 689 victims across Canada, and this is about sex or gender-based violent harassment or discriminations at the hands of 208 doctors. So let me begin by asking, even when you began this particular, study, when you found these numbers, how surprised, I guess maybe surprised is not the right word, but how shocked were you?
We expected there to be a high number just based on other reports, personal experience, and some of our other research. So I wasn't surprised as much as I was deeply disgusted and disappointed.
Fair enough. And in delving into the numbers, what did you discover in terms of, is there sort of a consensus here as to, what sorts of things doctors are doing?
For a lot of the cases, it would be what I would call inappropriate physical exam, where a doctor who is performing an intimate exam on sensitive parts of the body may linger too long or do an unnecessary sensitive exam. And I think that was one of the most common. The second most common would be having a sexual relationship with a patient, which is prohibited by most of the provincial colleges, which are our regulatory bodies.
So this is someone who starts off as a patient and then that develops into a relationship?
Yes, and it's really not allowed.
Okay, I can understand that not being allowed, but it seems to me at that point, the other person in this relationship has agreed to be in that relationship. Why would that not be allowed?
One of the reasons is because in some cases it can be easy to start a consensual relationship, but it can be a lot more difficult to end a relationship with a physician when they might be the only specialist in your area. Second of all, being a physician is a real privileged position. You know a lot about people, a lot about their families. And so our regulatory bodies have told us that you can't have a consensual relationship when there's such a power dynamic, such a vulnerability when someone knows so much about your body. And so even in the case of two otherwise consenting adults, our regulatory bodies have special rules about starting intimate relationships with patients.
Okay. Let me deal with a couple of other things here because, when you see the numbers, you said, you were disgusted by them. I couldn't believe they were this high, but part of the issue here, from what I understand in the story, is too often they don't get reported. Is that the case?
Yeah, and we saw that a lot in the news media articles. So we read news reports about physicians who had been accused or charged criminally with these types of events. And what we saw is after these were published or socialized, additional victims would come forward.
I see.
And so I think that there are a lot of patients who may have these experiences who don't come forward to report them for a multitude of reasons.
One of the other issues here, and this is perhaps the most chilling statistic, 3%, 30% of the doctors cited in the study, right, for sexual inappropriateness, had previous complaints filed against them for the same thing.
Yeah, that was really hard to read. It was hard to read those cases.
How did we get to that stage? What happened the first time around?
Well, it's really difficult because I think in a lot of the provinces, there isn't formal legislation that tells the regulatory colleges what to do in those cases. So Quebec being one of the earliest provinces, but also Ontario, Alberta, and Prince Edward Island have new laws about mandatory penalties for physicians who have sexual misconduct with their patients. But other provinces don't have that, and so they end up having these smaller penalties like practice restrictions or fines. Mm-hmm. And then when the physicians end their practice restrictions, they go on to do similar things again.
Wow. I'm wondering, for someone hearing this and thinking, wow, I didn't realize this was as big a problem. It has happened to someone I know. What's the advice to someone in a situation like this?
It's a really hard thing because, for example, if you're undergoing specialty care, you may not have a lot of options. It's really hard to imagine registering a complaint against your oncologist if they're the only specialist and you have cancer, or, the only neurologist in your town. But what I do want people to know is that there are a lot of provincial-based resources for support and advice. So at the very minimum, seeking out support or counseling to get you through this. The regulatory colleges do take complaints about physicians and can let you know if something that happened to you was appropriate or inappropriate. But the message from me personally, and I think from my co-authors, would be that we believe you, we know this happens, and we're very sorry.
Okay. Beyond, going to a group, an organization, and dealing with this, what about, you mentioned in Quebec where we have, now, of course, legislation around this. What about going to police?
It's so hard to advise somebody to go to the police because there are so many factors. Like, it can be so vulnerable to have to go and report something where you're not sure if it was appropriate or not, or to go talk about the worst thing that's ever happened to you with, a stranger, even when that stranger is a police officer and you don't know, are you going to be put on trial personally? I know for a lot of women who have come forward about concerns of sexual assault or gender-based discrimination, I think, our society hasn't always been kind to them. The criminal justice system hasn't always been kind to them. And I think that's a really, really hard personal journey. I know that a lot of the things that are described in our report are crimes, but, I have a lot of empathy for people who aren't ready or aren't in a position to report to the police formally.
I wonder what reaction has been from, say, the Canadian Medical Association to this. This is not their study. This is yours. What has been a reaction?
It wasn't part of our study to talk to the Canadian Medical Association or the CMPA, which is our legal representation in Canada, nor have I spoken to any of the colleges about this. As part of the research, we were really trying to focus on what the publicly available information showed. I'm always very open to knowing the college's responses, but I have not personally heard anything yet.
What have you heard? I mean, people react to this. What sort of comments and what sort of reaction did you get?
From a lot of my friends outside of medicine, people have reached out to share experiences that they've had with physicians and how much it means to see themselves sort of represented or validated in research. I think physicians, especially the women physicians that I know, are kind of less shocked about this information. My personal family and friends were shocked, much like yourself. So far the response has been generally very shocked and I would say disappointed.
Yeah.
I haven't heard anything too negative yet, but I'm sure that may come.
Well, can I ask you as a final question, because I have to wrap up, what do you hope comes from this?
I'm really hopeful that people who have experienced sex or gender-based harassment, discrimination, and violence, especially in the healthcare physicians feel safe and they feel seen by this information. I hope that the regulatory bodies feel empowered to work with legislators to make more repercussions available to them. I hope that the provincial colleges can work together to make a more standardized and transparent reporting system. And then I hope, in the next 10 years, to see more transparent data and to see a decrease in people with repeat offenses.
All right. Dr. Ruzycki, I will leave it at that. I thank you so much for your time. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
iHeartRadio is throwing it back.
2010s, the decade.
To the days of huge hits and unforgettable anthems. A non-stop stream of the biggest and best.
Drake, Rihanna, Beyonce, Katy, Gaga, The Weeknd,
and more. All your decade-defining favorites, all in one place.
Hi, it's Katy Perry.
Hey, it's Bruno Mars.
This is Kesha.
Find 2010's The Decade on the free iHeartRadio app. Preset the station so it's always one tap away.